the hills of Latimer County. Last week, we traveled there to check out the legend of Sasquatch, or Oklahoma's Bigfoot. Honobia, Oklahoma. Nestled in the middle of the Kiamichi Mountains and is only 30 miles from the Arkansas state line. It's one of Oklahoma's most beautiful and desolate areas, and for years has been known nationally as the home of Bigfoot. Darrell Williams is a lifelong resident of the area, and for 2 days was our guide through the mountains and streams where the sightings of this large ape-like creature are reported regularly.
I believe there's things going on out here that we cannot explain. I believe that. And it's more than just things that go bump in the night. You know, I mean, it's not totally just in our imagination. There is something in existence besides us.
One local shop owner near Honobia told us that there are skeptics and believers alike, but from her own experiences, she believes that there is something in these woods.
This guy down the road, he swears up and down that he shot one. You know, he actually shot at it, and because it was throwing rocks and gravel and stuff against his house and scaring his kids and all of this stuff. Of course, I don't get out at night, so I've never had occasion to see one, and I hear that he prowls around mostly at night.
If these creatures, beings, are like we talked about, the gene of the Susquehannock from the 1600s, they would have this kind of knowledge. There's none of these steels that's been cut by a saw or axe. They're all dead, fallen deals. Usually, if a human's going to do something, he'll have an axe or a saw or something. Unless he just really, transit needing shelter, and then what would he be doing way up here? Well, they're a lot bigger than a bear, but they totally walk different. They walk man-like, but they walk kind of with their shoulders, slumped over.
What's going on, y'all, and welcome to the 30th episode of the War Cry Podcast. I'm your host, Jehola Tiger, and got another one for you. We got another one. So to this episode is going to be about the Siege of Hanobia. So Honobia is located here in Oklahoma, but southeast Oklahoma to be exact. It kind of nestled in there next to the Kiamichi Mountains, or in the Kiamichi Mountains. And this story is a pretty crazy one, I'll be honest with you. So I have researched this story in multiple facets, I guess you could say. I've listened to it from multiple points of view. And I think the one that makes the most sense to me is the Sasquatch Chronicles. The way that was told, and that to me makes the most sense out of all of them. I mean, I know that there has been different podcasts here in Oklahoma, especially, that have talked about this. But this story is, I would say, top 5, maybe top 3 stories that I've ever heard or had come across, kind of in my looking at, I guess, hearing stories and listening to stories. So the Siege of Hanobia, like I said, is located here in Oklahoma. This is a report on the BFRO website. So the Bigfoot Research Organization, they have multiple, they're all over the country, and there's some parts of this story on that article, or that basically that report, that aren't exactly as it happened. So I'm going to talk about the brothers. We'll talk about kind of what happened, basically kind of in a linear fashion. So there's 2 brothers, Tim and Mike. Basically, Tim buys 30 acres of land in Honobia, and their dad buys 10 acres next to that property. That's kind of at an adjacent lot. But they bought their property basically to allow their kids to kind of play as they did when they were growing up. Kind of kids living that running free lifestyle, which I was accustomed to and had the privilege of doing in my life. But Tim and Mike basically had no idea kind of what Sasquatch was. I mean, they obviously, at some point did, but they never, ran into it. But literally, according to multiple sources, Mike saw this thing twice, or these creatures twice, in the middle of the day before anything really started happening. The first encounter he had, like I said, it was during the day. He wasn't really sure what he was seeing or what he was looking at. But then when he saw it the second time in the middle of the day, in the same week, he realized, he's like, oh crap, I'm looking at like Sasquatch. I'm looking at Bigfoot. And, he basically called it a monster in some of the sources that I've seen. And one of the kind of the turning points and kind of when things really started ramping up, Tim and his wife are having dinner outside, and this creature comes up and screams like the loudest scream ever. And basically he felt like it kind of shuddered his insides. And that's one thing about in the Bigfoot community. I know a lot of people talk about infrasound. Now, we look at infrasound in normal animals, and like a lion or a tiger, that growl that just like shakes your being, that like it basically initiates fight or flight. That's what he felt. And he calls his brother, and basically what he was kind of a detail that that I kind of looked saw was basically the China set moved. Like it kind of shook as this thing kind of roared at him. And he didn't want to call his brother because he really didn't want to get made fun of. But the more they lived on the property, the more they started to see things at all hours of the night. According to the BFR report, the brothers basically make these brothers out to be like rednecks, hicks, kind of backwoods people, like don't know nothing. You don't know what you're talking about. But that's really not the case. And other things that I've read, that like both brothers were really smart guys, and they knew what they were talking about. They've been out in the woods before in their life, and they know and understand that these things are not normal to every person. But Mike, started getting Mike and his family basically started getting harassed, kind of in the middle of the night. He would be laying in bed, and he would hear something bang on the door. And this is like early on. So, he's thinking like, who was it, man? It's like a little kid selling cookies or something, like who's, at the door at like midnight. And he would open the door and there'd be nobody there. And, at first it kind of would be 2 to 3 times, maybe, that first little bit. But then all of a sudden the knocks started hitting the windows. But they would always come, the knocks and the banging would always come around midnight to about sunrise. And then he would hear it also on the windows. And then eventually he started hearing it, rocks being thrown. It was hailing outside. It was just like little pebbles. But they weren't little pebbles. They were like actual decent-sized rocks. And like I said, as this progresses, it goes from about one night, every now and, and then it goes, basically every night. And they'd come in and peek into Mike and his wife's room. And then their kids would basically, sit there and watch these things, and they'd be watching, and then the creature would then show its teeth and growl, and the kids called it a monster. And then at this time, like kind of in this time frame of the story, Mike hardly ever sleeps, and he's having basically trying to protect his family. But through all this chaos, the creatures never tried to enter the home at this point in time. Now the BFRO report states that was the case. Like that the creatures always tried to get in, and they were, trying to basically ransack the home. But that's kind of not really what happened, according to other, information that I've seen. But the family had a shed in the back, and at the time, the shed had 5 deer carcasses. And what happened was they were hanging up, and the next morning they were gone. The family had 30 chickens, and they were all gone the next morning. And one thing too that he noticed, that the eggshells, it looked like something cracked the egg open just enough to where they could like drink the yolk in the egg white. and he noticed that the eggshells were leading off, headed towards the woods. As things get worse, in between the house and the tree line, there's about an acre pasture that he and his kids would play on. Well, kids were playing in the middle of the pasture one day, and about 3 or 4 of them were growling at the kids and shaking the trees and basically going crazy in these trees, tearing the place up. And the kids told their dad that there were monsters out there. There's monsters. We're getting they're trying to get us. And with these incidents, they really took a toll on him and his family. His wife literally had enough and left with the kids, and basically told Tim and Mike to figure it out and get rid of them. Basically, she said that they can't stay there. And up to this point in the story, it's kind of crazy to hear that they got so much activity. And be in mind, this happened years ago. This is about over a decade ago when this story was released and published to the public. So after his wife basically told him she had enough and that they can't stay there with the kids. Before that, so the brother's sister shows up with her 2 younger little kids, and to get into the property, they have to open up a gate and drive in. Well, Mike hears something going crazy outside, and he shows up to check it out, or goes outside to check it out, and he finds his sisters and her kids just totally freaked out, just so shook. One of the kids is under the seat hiding. His sister is white as a ghost, basically just pale. And the other kid is screaming, "Monster, monster, monster." And Mike realizes what they saw. So what happened was his sister pulled up to the gate and got out, and there were 3 of these things throwing rocks at the car, basically growling and being just super aggressive. And that's what the sister told him after. Well, another incident happened with his niece, and she came over. She was about 19 years old, and she had basically had an injury, and she was healing from the injury. It was a broken foot, to be exact. But she comes running into the house, and she's so scared, so shook. And she says, "There's a monster out there." This is the part of the story that really makes me kind of if I saw this, hell to the no, I'm out of there. I'm not staying there. We passed the point of no return on that. We out of there. So things, like I said, this situation and his niece telling him that there's a monster out there, and it frightened her and it scared her, and she was so shook. He had been dealing with at this point 2 years. So 2 years that he's been dealing with this, and he cannot go any he's over it. It's over. He's done. So he goes out and he goes into his room, gets his gun, and chases after this thing. And as he's going around the back, he could hear this thing running because it's running. It's not trying to hide. It's it's running. And he hears it go back around to the front. Well, then he circles back, comes back the way he came, and then tries to get that thing up in the front part of the house. And when he does that, he basically looks out to the brush, and he can see it moving, and he just takes a shot. Just shoots it. Doesn't even care. Just shoots it. And, in some of the sources that I've looked, he was the type of guy that would never really just shoot broadly into a bush. Because, I guess, according to what I've seen, his weapon safety was a huge thing for him. But when he gets back into the house, the niece basically said that she got out of the car, and she was locking it, and as she turned around, this thing was standing 20 feet away from her, growling, and she just literally just lost it, just took off. And she also said when Mike was chasing this thing around the house, he has big bay windows in the front of the house, and this thing was bigger than the windows. And she said that as it was kind of walking away, she could see it, and it was baring its teeth. And as Mike started making his way back, the creature realized that, oh, I'm toast if I don't get out of here. And she said that it made this fright face where its eyes, she could see the whites of his eyes, and it took off. One detail too that I looked at is the family didn't gift these things. They just showed up. They showed up and they had what they had at the house, and they didn't do any of that stuff. So that kind of crosses off the list of gifting. I know the BFR report basically says that they had snow peas that they planted, and then when they get rid of the snow peas, the deer will go away and the creatures will go away. Well, they never planted them. They were there to begin with. So after all these events that happened to Mike and Tim, a lot of stuff was to Mike, but Tim, cooperated and basically, at a later time was sending emails back and forth with different people, basically confirming everything Mike is saying. They're alone at the house. They're sitting back to back in the middle of the house, and they look over at the window. And I'll say this too. At this part of the story, it's a pretty crazy part of the story. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like the way that they describe it, to me is so wild. But who am I to say these guys are lying? But they look over at the window, and there's this creature looking at them, and it's baring its teeth. Well, these dudes, they get up. They're like, nah, not anymore. They bust out the back door. This thing is running off the porch, and it's about 25 feet away, and they ring off 3 shots. They hit the creature 3 times in the head, back, and in the lungs. Excuse me. Dang, I know as my lungs are going. No. But Mike said this thing when they shot it and hit it 3 times, it flopped like a human would in like a movie. It looked like a movie, like you get hit and you're going down, and it kind of went off into the darkness. Then Mike states that he could hear that the creature was dying, and it was gurgling blood and it was gasping for air. And they had this idea like, okay, well, let's let it die, and then let's drag the body back up and take pictures and do all this other stuff. Well, what they didn't realize was right inside the tree line, and it wasn't that far from the creature, from the, laying on the ground. A bigger one came out, a bigger, sized one came out, and they could hear 2 others freaking out in the tree line, just going crazy. They said it sounded like apes, but they were going crazy. Well, the bigger one, a slightly bigger one, comes out and rushes those guys, basically trying to get it away from the body. And basically it picked it up and it took it back into the woods. And for that night, it was dead silent. There was no noise at all in those woods. And now this part, like I said, that is crazy. I would just imagine, coming across an animal or a being that's not in the normal realm of view, like of what we know to be in the woods, and you shoot and kill it, and then proceed to continue to deal with these things. It's just the craziest thing. But in the sources that I read, that basically Mike and Tim call the BFRO. This is where the BFRO steps in, and they make their report and they do what they got to do. But they call them and then they say, "Hey, we'll send out some investigators." And Tim and Mike basically go, "No, you need to send out a hunter. Like, we need to get rid of these things. Like, these things they're not, they're not pleasant by any means." And so after that crazy night of killing that creature, basically the creature started getting into the home. And now this is the part where they actually started getting into the home, and it's not like the entire time. And Mike's kind of states in the conversation he had with Wes Germer, shout out Sasquatch Chronicles, that he felt like these things were after him. Like they wanted him and they wanted Tim. They wanted both of those guys. They could not stand it enough. They wanted him so bad because of killing one of their own. So he goes and buys all this equipment. He buys, automatic rifles. He buys all this crazy stuff, night vision goggles. He wanted to be prepared, in case something does happen. Well, the BFRO finally makes it out, and they brought out a couple experts, quote unquote, and a hunter who was 74 years old. The hunter basically slept the entire time and didn't really do much, but the 2 experts that they sent out from the BFRO basically were so scared that first night because so much stuff was going on. Like, they were peeking into the windows, they were banging on doors, they were throwing rocks at the house, they were doing all types of crazy stuff that those 2 people wanted to pack up and leave. Like, they just wanted to get out of there. They wanted no parts of that. And basically Mike and Tim, the 2 brothers, talked them into staying. And I know that, how much credence do you put into those BFROs? I know I don't really have an opinion either way, but I know that's a pretty big organization. But their expectations were to basically buy the property from Mike and Tim and create some type of Jane Goodall, like, oh, we gift you this, you gift us that, and create a relationship with these creatures. And according to the Sasquatch Chronicles episode that I had listened to on this part of it, that there was no way. Like, there's no way that they're doing that. So, one thing, too, so once they leave, this stuff is still going on, different, types of encounters and issues that they're having with these creatures. But Mike starts to describe that there's different descriptions of these creatures. One of them looks like a gorilla. There's some that look like gorillas. There's some that look like a mixed human gorilla, like kind of looking face. And then there's some that just look flat out like Down syndrome, like people that have Down syndrome. How their faces, are different. And that's how he described it. If it's not PC, I'm sorry, but that's just the way he described it. And he said during the day their eyes are black with the white. Like they look creepy. Like they don't look like they have whites in their eyes. He said the eye shine thing, basically when it's a flashlight or an older car light, they're red. The eyes are red. But if it's a halogen bulb or halogen lights, it's amber / kind of gold / yellow. And he told about different kind of things that they did. Is he thinks his opinion was that they were an animal, but they were smarter than a normal animal, because what they would do, and this is kind of crazy. So he went and bought a bunch of these lights, and in these, with each light, he put them in strategic points around the house. Well, he would notice that after a while, it would keep them away, but then after a while, they started kind of showing back up, and he started noticing these small stick structures at random points around the house. And, he was walking around and he, realized that, this is kind of dusk where, the light, where you can start seeing when the lights come on, when the motion comes on. And he noticed, he's like, why isn't the light coming on? He looked and all the lights were turned up. So they weren't showing up. And so when it would kick on, it would shine up in the air. And another thing, too, that, like I said, he had those little stick structures. So when he would look out there some nights, they would all be standing all at different points behind, right behind the light, which is, super creepy. Imagine, having a porch light and you just see someone standing, right beyond. You can see, their feet, but you can't see anything else. It's just because it's so dark out there. And they're in the middle of nowhere. If you've never been to Honobia, man, it's middle of nowhere. It's in nowhere. 30 miles to get somewhere, 30 miles to get, to anywhere, really. But he started noticing, as the brothers kept kind of, they kept having this, it was almost like a chess match. So there was this one and this is, like I said, Mike said, about 9 foot tall, gorilla-looking Sasquatch, Bigfoot. And he could tell it would come out and it would, bait the guys. It would try to get them to come out of the house and basically get those guys riled up. But he noticed that every time that they would go out there, they would go deeper and deeper, closer to the wood line. And they started looking, because the way that the pasture, it's about an acre, but it's in a weird U. So there's forest on one side, forest on another side, and it goes, the deeper you go into the pasture, the closer you get to the center point on the U of that tree line. And that last time that they tested, they went out there because they were so mad at these creatures. It dawned on them. They were like, oh, this is a choke point. So when you get to the edge of that pasture, and if they go step foot in that tree line, those creatures could come behind them and grab them. And Mike and Tim realized that. And I thought that was kind of a crazy kind of thought that they had battle, these creatures had battle plans. They knew if they could get those guys to come out and get mad, get riled up, they could create a choke point and basically take those guys. And I thought that was a super crazy, thing about that. Another kind of crazy thing too is when he was talking about, they put out game. So during the day, they put out game cams, they put out infrared lights, and he said one thing that they do not like is infrared. I don't know if it hurts their eyes. He didn't really specify, but he put out a game camera, the infrared, and they basically tried to, on the back side of the camera, they tried to put sticks around it so they could walk by. But I don't know if it has to do with something with the eyes or if it's just if it burns. I don't know, but it's kind of crazy that they would try to block that. But what he said that he had videos and pictures to prove this stuff, and obviously we'll talk about this here in a second. But basically, what he was saying how they hunt is the tree knocks. Everyone talks about tree knocks. Is that's how they communicate basically assembly line how to ambush prey. So they'll wait out, they'll hang out and watch a deer come down the game trail, and then they'll knock, and it tells the other ones that, oh, hey, we got something coming. And I always wondered that, like, people say they hear wood knocks and whatnot, things like that, and I always thought that was kind of interesting. But basically, that's how they would tell the other ones that, hey, this is coming. And they were talking about tree structures. They think basically tree structures are put up to let other ones know that, hey, this is where the humans go. If you don't want to be subject to the gun, to the metal that they have in their hands, you just need to stay past, on the other side of this point. And the question was asked, basically, do they know about guns? And Mike and Tim both, Mike and then Tim confirmed it, that they do know, because they know that that's the thing that goes boom and it can hurt you. And every time that, they would carry a gun, they would be left alone because they know. Which I thought was kind of crazy too. Like, I don't know if they've had a run in with another person. But, an example of that was Tim one night they have a dumpster, big old industrial dumpster on the back side of the property. And one night he had heard something kind of, rustling around in the dumpster. Well, he goes and just walks up casually, and he had his gun on him because, he at this point he's, they're battling basically a clan of Sasquatches, and one of them pops up, and it's about 9 foot tall, and it like looks down at him, and it looks over on his hand. He's got his gun. He said that this thing had this look on his face like, oh crap, I'm dying today. Like this is death. This is the fight or flight. All of a sudden it goes back down, and he's like, what? How did it disappear? And then he waited a second, and he said, he was only like 10 feet away from this thing. He waits a second, and then he kind of goes around to the back, and he snaps I guess a twig snaps, or he made some noise, and this thing jumps out on all fours, and then jumps a fence from all fours onto 2 feet. It like cleared the fence. And one thing that scared Mike, that basically kind of shook him, was the fact that this thing transitioned from 4 legs to 2 feet in a matter of like that. And he said he tried to shoot it, but he couldn't even get a beat on it because it was so fast. It like disappeared. It was so fast. So that that's kind of that's crazy. Like that's so crazy that these guys went through that. Like I said, they talked about how they people always say that they wash, like, oh, they're just washing their hands, but they noodle is what Mike said. He said he caught one. He has a creek on the back side on the kind of on more back in there, and it's got fish in it, or it's like a lake, or I don't know what it is, but a body of water. And he watched this thing basically put its fingers in this, like it had its arm in there, but then it pulled out a big old fish. And so he thinks that they noodle. That's how they get fish. Is they just put their fingers in there like little worms, and it takes it and they grab it, and he said he watched it devour an entire fish, like the entire thing, bones and all. But so that's kind of the essence of that story. They still battle it to this day. I know, like I said, he came out in, I think, 2014, about, like I said, almost 10 years ago, and really gave a detailed report. But to this day, they haven't really, he hadn't really said much. A lot of this attention happened when the BFRO got involved, and because he was only going to keep it private. Well, he had, people coming out, to his property, game wardens, and so after it went public, and he was basically, people are aware that this is going on at this property in Honobia, or Honobia, or however you say it. Basically, game wardens were at his property every single day, and they quit messing around. They just, they would just let stuff happen, and the game wardens would just sit there and watch them. But one day that, this is kind of, what I mentioned earlier about kind of the government aspect of this. And he had mentioned that he had a blacked out vehicle kind of sitting by his power, the power that's next to the road. They have sometimes out in the country they have these little boxes that are like big, and they're next. They usually just kind of sit next to a pole sometimes, especially like to maybe turn off the power or whatever it is. And Mike notices him and goes out there and talks to the guy, and the guy's all, this is what we're out here doing. We just want to make sure you have power. We've been having some reports of power outages. But the guy tried to get out there as quickly as possible. But he had noticed that this has been going on. And kind of my opinion, if they ever found out that Bigfoot was real, if people found out that Sasquatch was real, you think about how they shut down, nature preserves for birds or for rodents or, all these different types of animals in more exotic parts of the world. They shut it down. So the logging industry is a reason. Also, too, people are going to be afraid to go out in the woods when they know that there's something 9 foot that can take them at any time if they cross it. Because, we don't speak the same language. People have their opinions about what Sasquatch is, and I have mine. And I'm curious if you guys, that's going to be a question I'm going to ask. If you just scroll down a little bit as you're listening, type in what you think it is, and I'm going to give it options. It'll be a poll. Is it an ape? Is it a human ape hybrid? What could this be? But, imagine, I know an example was the bird up in the Pacific Northwest. They shut everything down. Like they shut logging, that's now a protected space because that's that bird's habitat. What if that was the case? And, to keep these creatures under wraps, has been a tall task, in my opinion. But it's just so crazy to think that, they're actively trying to make sure this is not disclosed. But what do you guys think of this, of Mike and Tim's story? Like I said, if you type in Siege of Hanobia on Spotify, you will find multiple episodes. I highly suggest to go listen to, there's more details, about their hunting style and what they do, like to certain animals. Like there was one I didn't want to really go into it because it's kind of brutal. But like I said, there's more details to that story. I just kind of hit the cliff notes because, I kind of don't like when episodes go 40 minutes long, an hour long. But it is what it is. But let me know what you think, about the episode and kind of what you think about the story. I 100% believe that this happens. There's, I've heard different stories of these creatures coming on people's property and taking, all their livestock. But if you guys can catch me on Facebook, Yehola Tiger, message me. Let me know you listen to the podcast. Tell me what episode you like. TikTok, One Man Band 918. Twitter, One Man Band 918. Eventually, I'm looking at getting an Instagram. I haven't really... I feel like Instagram, you got to put like videos up, and I'm just like, I'm so swamped sometimes, and so I feel like I won't, moderate it or look at it as much as I should. But I appreciate you guys listening in, and I'll catch you on the next one.